What crazy story do you need to tell? Story 1. When I was in high school and for a few years after, my primary source of income was selling pot. One day I was just hanging out at home with my girlfriend. We went to the Circle K a few houses down and got some beer. The clerk, who I knew pretty well at this point, asked if I knew where he could get a dub sack. I said sure and that I'd be back soon. I went home and forgot about it. An hour or two later I was like, oh shoot, remembered, waited out and went back. He had already given me the money, very important detail for later, so I waited until he had no customers. He came out and we went around the icebox just smoking and chatting. I handed him the bag. Now there was no one around. The lot was empty except for this beat-up Volvo facing the record store next door. If I had been paying better attention, I may have noticed this Volvo had completely tinted windows, which seemed odd for a beat-up car. Two men got out of the car and approached us. One was a tall, skinny guy wearing 100% denim, and the other looked like a bounty hunter in a beige sweater. They walked up and asked how we were doing. Me and the clerk looked at each other like, you know these guys? Then all of a sudden they flashed badges and yelled, EPD! You're under arrest, and cuffed us, separated us, and searched us. The guy in beige went through my texts, found a couple of questionable ones, a few crumpled up 20s, and started trying to get me to admit to doing a lot of business today. Then they surprised me by walking me and my girlfriend back to my porch, saying they'd seen me come and go quite a bit and just wanted to make sure you don't have a pound of something worse in there, and that they'd just charge me with a misdemeanor. Otherwise, it would be jail and a felony. So here we are, on my front porch, me saying there's no way I'm letting them in the house and repeating call my lawyer over and over. At one point, my roommate walks out, says hi, gets in his car and leaves. Then the guy in beige explains that if I don't let him search the house, he's going to park squad cars on the lawn, extract everyone from the house, wait on a warrant, and charge everyone for anything found in any room. I now know this wasn't legal. Back then, I was just scared. My roommate that had just left was a total nerd with a great job. Straight edge, rarely drank, never smoked. I was terrified of him losing his job. Unfortunately for me, I had just gotten a great deal on a large amount of mushrooms. The area was super dried up on them, so I asked around and had most of my sales lined up before I even picked them up. Bad timing, because just 30 feet away on the coffee table in my bedroom was a quarter pound of mushrooms, already weighed out into ounces and eighths. On top of that, there was all the pot in there too. It wasn't looking good. So I proposed that I let one of them search just my bedroom and be done with it. I knew once I let them in, they could do whatever, but I was out of options. The guy in beige agreed. The one in denim stayed with my girlfriend, who looked absolutely terrified, like, what are you doing? And the other followed me in. I led him upstairs, walked right past my door, which thank goodness was closed, and into my straight-edge roommate's room. The officer completely turned it over, pulled out drawers, flipped the mattress, the whole thing. As he did that, I quietly turned off the computer monitor, which had a photo of my roommate and his girlfriend glaring on it. The guy found nothing, stuck to his word, and walked me and my awkward grin back downstairs. My girlfriend, probably thinking I was going to prison for a long time, looked like she was about to faint. But I was just grinning. The guy still charged me with a felony. Then they left. Story 2. When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my father divorced, and he gave up all parental rights. I've never met him or spoken to him. I've only seen a few pictures. About 2 years ago, I was working at a healthcare facility where I floated between different offices around the county, depending on who needed help. One particular morning, I was checking the doctor's schedule and saw my father's name. He was scheduled for an appointment in the office next door to where I was working, and I thought it was pretty crazy, but I most likely wouldn't even see him. The time of his appointment came, and he walked into my office straight up to me and said he had a doctor's appointment with Dr. X. My heart was racing because I knew it was him as soon as he walked through the door. I told him Dr. X was in the office next door and he left. A little while later, I walked over to the other office to deliver some faxes, and on my way out, he trailed behind me. I held the door open for him. He said thank you, and that was my one and only interaction with my father in my 30 years of living. Story 3. So, me and my brother are fraternal twins. Our stepmom passed away due to breast cancer when we were around 15 years old. She was like a second mother to us and had been around since we were very young, about 5 years old. Now fast forward to our junior year of college. I attended a school in upstate New York while he was at a university in Florida. One night, I woke up in sweat, tears running down my face. I had the most vivid dream. I was in a house, and my stepmother was there. I knew she had passed in the dream, which was a first for me. She hugged me, told me how handsome I had become, and said she loved me. I woke up drenched in sweat thinking, what was that? I didn't say anything to anybody and went to class. As I was walking back to my apartment after class, I got a call from my brother. His first words were, I know this is going to sound weird, but I had the most vivid dream about Maggie last night. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as he went on to describe the exact same dream I had just experienced the night before. We've never had a twin moment like this, and I don't really know what to make of it, but it's always been a story I wanted to share. Story 4. I was served lunch sometime during a flight. While eating, I noticed that the woman next to me was slowing down. Slower cutting, slower chewing, etc. Suddenly, she completely stopped moving. Fork and knife still in her hands, food half cut on her plate, face bowed forward above the tray, nothing else. I touched her shoulder, nudged her a bit, asked if everything was okay. No response. I couldn't really tell if she was still alive. Was it the air conditioning or her breath? I had no idea. I didn't want to panic and frighten everyone else. Possible emergency. I made eye contact with a flight attendant and gestured toward the woman. A couple of minutes later, 5 flight attendants, including the co-pilot, formed a barrier around our seats and, like in a movie, tried to get a reaction. Don't you fall asleep on us? That kind of thing. The woman suddenly woke up, looked up, and said just one sentence. I took really strong sleeping pills. And then she went right back to sleep, in the same frozen pose. As if this had happened before, and she knew this exact moment would come, and she'd be awake just long enough to say that sentence. So for the entire remaining 6 to 7 hour flight, I had this lady next to me, mimicking a Tyrannosaurus, hands still gripping the now removed utensils, drooling onto the tray. And everyone passing by gave me that questioning look. Best flight ever. Story 5. I saved a man's life, and I never saw him again. 10 years later, it's still the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. In high school, I worked as a lifeguard at a country club for a few summers to earn some money. It was a cushy gig, members only. A big part of the job was learning people's names and chatting with them. Mostly stuff like, "Good morning, Mr. Garrity," and listening to generic complaints about millennials. Over the 4th of July weekend, there were more people at the pool than usual. Each member could bring one guest. There was a middle-aged man jumping off the diving boards who I hadn't seen before. He was over 6 feet tall, at least 230 pounds, and doing flips off the low dive into the pool to make big splashes for laughs. On one jump, he got a running start and slipped off the board at the very end. His momentum was already leaning backward, and as he came off the board, his head smacked into it hard. I can still hear the cracking sound. I was in the lifeguard chair watching it all unfold. I hoped I wouldn't have to jump in, but I knew it was bad. I didn't see any blood, but as he sank, I counted. 1 1,000, 2 1,000. No movement. I blew 3 short whistles to signal the need for the neck board and dove in with my buoy. I swam down 8 to 9 feet and pulled him up. He was out cold. Surprisingly light underwater, I hoisted him onto the buoy and swam him to the edge. Other guards were already there with the board. We strapped him in. The guards lifted the board as I climbed out. A few shocked faces around us, and I realized it was up to me now. Still running on training and adrenaline, I yelled for someone to call an ambulance and made a tough decision. I suspected a neck injury. The board stabilizes the head, but he wasn't breathing visibly. I decided to start chest compressions. What they don't tell you is that CPR feels brutal. You can feel things crack. 1 round of 30, then 2 breaths. His head was already tilted, so I didn't need to move his neck. After 5 or 6 compressions, water trickled from his mouth. He coughed, and the guards quickly moved him. I lay back on the concrete, heart racing, everything spinning. I was taken to the guard shack, dried off, and then led to the country club's nicer building. The manager, who was a friend's dad and got me the job, sat with me. I gave a statement, signed papers, and was sent home. I was in a daze and it took hours to process. When I came back to work, I heard he was okay. One of the guards said the member who brought him was thankful, but I never saw the guy again. To this day, it's the most intense moment of my life. I'm just glad I remembered my training. I may not have done everything perfectly, but I tried my best. And he lived. Story 6. I'm from a tiny province in the Philippines and decided to work in Manila right after college, way back in 2007. I got into a call center and made a lot of friends. I stayed with the company for about 2 years, but the graveyard shift wasn't for me. Fast forward to 2013, my widowed mom, who still lived in the province, met a French man through a mutual friend, and they quickly became interested in each other. They eventually got engaged in 2014 and married soon after. 90-Day Fiancé France edition, planning to move back to France together. As they were preparing for the trip, I made a post on social media asking if anyone had Filipino connections in France who might help my mom transition smoothly. A former colleague from that call center job in Manila messaged me. She told me she had a Filipina friend, let's call her Rowena, who had been living in France for over 20 years and might be able to help my mom. So I told my mom to add Rowena on Facebook and connect with her. They did, and they started talking regularly. One day my mom was video chatting with Rowena, and they got to discussing their husbands. My mom pulled out and showed her a vintage photo of her husband from when he was in university, an old black and white photo of him sitting on a couch with his then best friend, whom he hadn't seen since graduation. Career opportunities abroad and the lack of cell phones back then had caused them to drift apart. As soon as Rowena saw the photo, she gasped. "That's my husband beside your husband," she said. She hurried to her office and took out the exact same photo. Her husband had kept it all these years as well. After the initial shock and a few tears, two long-lost best friends were able to reconnect after nearly 40 years. Story 7. For context, I'm a 19-year-old Scottish guy who was interrailing around Europe for a month. We were in Budapest for a few days, hitting up the clubs and enjoying the famous Sparties. It was a great time. Eventually, it came time to leave, and we decided to take an early morning train to Split around 5 a.m. We had 2 taxis booked to the train station. We stumbled out, still half asleep, and started loading our stuff into the cars. As we were packing up, we saw 3 young guys sprinting full speed up the road yelling, "Run!" We laughed, thinking they were just drunk and messing around. No, they weren't. As we climbed into the taxis, a guy covered head to toe in tattoos, and someone else's blood came to my door and asked to shake my hand. Not wanting to offend someone who looked completely unhinged, I shook his bloodied hand. He wished me well. I thought I got off lightly. Then he tried the same thing with our big Bulgarian taxi driver, who refused. The driver got in the taxi and started to back out. The tattooed guy didn't like that one bit and began smashing the taxi with his elbows, fists, and knees. We started to drive away, thinking there was no way he'd bother chasing a car going 20 miles per hour, right? Wrong. He took off after us at superhuman speed with a crazed look in his eyes. The taxi turned a corner, and we thought we'd lost him. But there was a garbage truck blocking the entire road. As we slowed down, this guy came flying around the corner like he'd been launched from a slingshot. I started yelling in half-asleep Scottish, "Lock the doors!" Thankfully, the driver listened. The maniac started pounding on the windows with his fists, smearing blood all over. His knuckles were torn up. He ripped off the wing mirrors and started smashing the windows with them. Meanwhile, our friends in the taxi behind us were in hysterics, laughing, while we sat frozen in terror, thinking this was it. The Grim Reaper had arrived. Both taxi drivers got out and confronted him. He spit in their faces, threw the wing mirror at them, then finally ran off into the distance. The wildest part? As he was leaving, he calmly apologized to one of the locals who had been watching the whole thing in disbelief. Story 8. This is a long story from the early 1980s that involves a bit of Kentucky justice. My family lived just outside Cincinnati, on the Kentucky side of the Ohio River. My father's older brother, my uncle, lived there too. He had 4 daughters. When one of them turned 18, she started dating an older guy who convinced her to move down south with him. My uncle gave his blessing, and his daughter left with her boyfriend, heading deep into a remote part of Kentucky where the boyfriend's extended family lived. Time passed, and my uncle hadn't heard from her in a while. He started to grow concerned. Then one day he got a call from her. She was crying and calling from a payphone at a grocery store. She said she was being mistreated by her boyfriend's family, forced to work and kept isolated like a prisoner. Before she could say more, the line went dead. Now my uncle was an avid hunter and a passionate gun collector. He explained the situation to his wife and daughters, packed up his Oldsmobile Delta 88 with some of his favorite firearms, and headed down to that remote holler in Kentucky. There were no street names, just dirt roads and isolated farms. By the time he found the house, it was night. The boyfriend's family was outside on the porch, shooting shotguns into the air, clearly trying to intimidate him. My uncle parked his car 50 yards from the house, popped the trunk, and calmly laid out his rifles on the hood, like a scene out of an action movie. He was a huge man, known for his explosive temper, and he shouted up to the porch, "If my daughter doesn't come down in 5 minutes, I'm coming up there, and I'm not leaving any man, woman, or child standing." The boyfriend and his brothers bolted back into the house, and less than a minute later, my cousin came running out, suitcase in hand. Same uncle, different story. One day, he was driving across a narrow bridge that only allowed one car at a time. He ended up in a standoff with 3 guys in a pickup truck who started honking and yelling at him to back up. Being as stubborn as he was, he refused. Instead, he got out of his car to confront them directly, banking on his size and reputation to change their minds. One of the men shouted, "You don't scare us. There are 3 of us." To which my uncle calmly responded, "Do all 3 of you know how to swim?" They immediately backed up the truck and let him pass. Story 9. I work in a supermarket as a team leader. I'm quite social, so I like to include everyone who's new and make them feel comfortable. There was this new guy around 17 years old who was very quiet. He spoke only when spoken to, and no one really tried to converse with him. So I did. I was very kind to him, and at first he wasn't very approachable. But over the weeks he started opening up and became kind to me as well. Still, none of the other co-workers did this. I didn't give it a second thought at the time, but I understood why when he quit after 3 months. It turned out he had to do this as some kind of community service. He was actually a criminal, and my cost-cutting supermarket had hired him because they only had to pay him half the normal salary. But that's not all. About a year later, some drunk guys in a bar started a fight with me. It wasn't a big deal until I went home. 5 of them were waiting for me at the exit. I didn't want my friend to get involved, so I just kept walking like they weren't there until they actually stopped me and were about to beat me up. And there he was, the guy from the supermarket, along with his tough-looking friends. I never felt so cool in my life. 6 guys around 21 to 25 years old came to my rescue because he still considered me a friend. They threatened the drunk guys, saying, "Tell us why we shouldn't destroy you right now." I couldn't thank him and them enough, and after that, we went our separate ways again. Sometimes I still see him and we give each other a nod. Story 10. I'm from Belgium and have traveled a lot with my parents when I was younger. When I was still together with my ex-girlfriend, we traveled a lot as well, but neither of us had been to the USA, so we told this to a befriended couple, and a few beers later, we started planning a trip together because another mutual friend was studying in Philadelphia for a year, and we figured we might as well visit him. First, we went to New York and Philly for a few days, then took a plane to LA, rented a car, and took a road trip through California, Nevada, and Utah. During this road trip, we'd often laugh about some of the odd things we'd seen people do in America. We joked a lot about people in small towns and the kind of crazy stuff they might get up to. We had just been to Sequoia National Park, and we were looking for a place to eat and spend the night because it was getting late. We found an old farmhouse with fixed-up cabins and asked the woman renting them where we could get food. The town was called Pinehurst and had a very low population. She pointed us to Pinehurst Lodge, the only restaurant bar store for miles. We went there, had an amazing meal, and decided to grab some drinks and play pool. While playing, a large older man approached us. Jean shirt, eagle print, George W. Bush emblem, bushy mustache. He looked intimidating. We assumed he'd confront us about the pool table or our laughter, but he turned out to be one of the kindest people we'd ever met. He asked if he could join us, bought us moonshine, which we thought was hilarious, and we bought him a few beers in return. We had a great time. While playing and drinking, the phone behind the bar kept ringing, but no one was answering. At around 11:30 p.m., a woman suddenly barged in holding a gun. She stormed over to us, stopped behind our new friend, smashed an empty beer bottle on his head, and began shouting and hitting him. He calmly told her to relax, turned to us, shook our hands, told us to let him know if we were ever back so we could hang out, and then walked out with her. The bartender shouted, "That's his wife. She's a bit jealous," and called 10 times asking when he'd be home. We said, "Okay, we're just going to head out then." The bartender replied, "Oh no, dearies, best you stay a little longer. She's yelling outside, and I can tell she's mad at you guys too. Thinks it's your fault he stayed late. Wouldn't be the first time she's pulled a weapon on someone for that. Just wait until they leave." So we stayed about 30 more minutes. They kept shouting outside. Then we heard a car start and saw a white truck speed off. Seconds later, another truck followed at high speed. We heard the bartender say, "She drives our kids to school on the bus, you know." This would never happen back home. 100% going back to Pinehurst Lodge someday. Story 11. When I was about 10, my family moved from the city to a small town in northern Australia, just a few hundred residents. We started going to school and, after a few weeks, made friends with the other kids. They kept telling us about a club in town called the Nature Rangers. From how they described it, it sounded like a knockoff version of the Boy Scouts, camping, hiking, and movie nights on Fridays with popcorn and hot dogs. My younger sister and I begged our parents to let us join, so on Friday night, we got dropped off at the hall. We lined up outside, all the kids joking and laughing, and then the doors opened. We started walking in, and the whole mood changed instantly. Everyone went silent. As I entered, I looked around and saw signs on the walls like, "Sinners must burn," "The devil is coming for you," and "Christ is your only savior." The one that stood out the most was a giant mural of Australia engulfed in flames, with only our northern town spared. Total culture shock for city kids like us. What happened next got even weirder. It felt like something from a movie about cults in the American South. We sang strange folk songs, listened to fire and brimstone sermons, and were told to give our faith to the Lord Jesus. One song that stuck with me even years later went, "He's under my feet, he's under my feet, Satan is under my feet." We even had to learn a dance for it. My sister and I kept looking at each other like, when is this going to end? After all that, we were ushered outside. The boys and girls were separated. The girls stayed at the hall, but the boys were told to get into a white van with a creepy old man they called Brother Joseph. That's when I knew we needed to leave. I snuck out of the line, found my sister, and said we were leaving. It was already dark, so we crept through backyards and hid from car lights and bushes and trees. When we were about half a kilometer from home, I told my sister to run for it. We sprinted the rest of the way and burst into the house, telling our parents everything. They said they'd never seen us so scared. We laugh about it now, but back then, it was terrifying. We stayed in that town for another 3 months, and the other kids never mentioned the Nature Rangers to us again. Story 12. I stole my own car back once. I used to restore classic cars. I had the most valuable one I've ever owned at a body shop, and the guy took forever to finish it. He had painted other cars for me in the past, but apparently he developed a drug problem. I would check on the car every week to see if there was any progress. Finally, after a year, he told me he had painted 90% of it, but was now asking for more money than we originally agreed on. I drove there on a Friday afternoon unannounced and saw my car sitting outside the shop, worth a ton of money, with the shop owner nowhere in sight. His neighbor told me he had left the car outside for 3 days and that several people had tried to steal it. So I called a tow truck and had it towed to my garage immediately. On the way home, the shop owner called me over and over again. He thought someone had stolen the car. He kept calling me for months. I never responded. Story 13. I'm a pretty avid cyclist, which means that whenever I have the time, I ride my bike away from the city I live in into the mountainous suburbs to challenge myself on some of the local climbs. On one of these rides, I had just gone up and down a massive mountain and was on my way back to the city center. I was fairly tired and still had 40 kilometers to go. Suddenly, I noticed traffic on the opposite lane had stopped for some reason. What I saw next completely stunned me. There was an ostrich on my side of the road, running after the car in front of it. What the heck? It's not like the country I live in has wild ostriches. I slowly followed behind the bird, watching it chase the car, and I was faced with a decision. Do I overtake the ostrich? Now, I'm no expert on ostriches, but I do remember reading that they run fast and can be aggressive toward humans. I really didn't want to become the victim of an ostrich attack, but I also wanted to get home quickly since it was getting dark. After hesitating for a bit, I gave it everything I had and overtook the ostrich. The rest isn't particularly interesting. I made it home unharmed. But to this day, it's still one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Running into an ostrich while on a bike ride. Story 14. I didn't have a car when I was in university, which made going out with friends a bit annoying. I would constantly find myself stumbling home half drunk in the middle of the night or waiting for the first train in the early morning. One day I was visiting friends and the only way back home that late, it must have been between 1 and 2 in the morning, was a train that followed some forgotten country route. My stop was near a small forest and a 13th century Central European castle. I knew the way well since I used to play there as a kid. You had to walk through some fields, past horse stables, through a patch of woods that dipped into a slope, around the castle woods, then down a narrow road between 2 fields, past an abandoned gatekeeper's house that looked like it came out of a horror movie, and finally under a bridge that led back to civilization. There were no streetlights. I was still a bit drunk and considered waiting for the next bus. But that would have taken hours. It was summer, the weather was nice, and I thought, well, I know this path by heart, easy peasy. So I started walking. Everything was fine until I reached the slope. As soon as the terrain dipped, it was pitch black. On my left were woods, completely dark. On my right, a hill covered in underbrush blocked the moonlight. I couldn't even see my own feet. I shuffled forward like an idiot, one stray branch away from a broken ankle. It took forever to reach the end of the slope. Stumbling through darkness in the woods at night is no joke. Every sound made me think someone was about to jump out and kill me. The only thing that kept me calm was remembering something a former teacher once said. The forest is actually one of the safest places at night. No criminal would wait in the middle of nowhere for a random victim. You're more likely to get mugged in a city alley, so I kept going. Eventually the moonlight came back, and I could see a bit better. Just as I was walking past the abandoned house, mentally congratulating myself for being brave, someone suddenly jumped out of the woods to my right. It happened so fast I couldn't even scream. It was a jogger, in full running gear. In the middle of the night, in the woods, with no light. He just kept running down the path ahead of me like he had night vision or something. I eventually made it home unmurdered. I swore I'd never do that again. And then did the same thing the following week, minus the jogger. I honestly don't know how I made it past 30. Story 15. Don't know how interesting it is, but a few years ago, I used to go to college in the morning and leave around midnight because I didn't have a PC and needed to do all my homework at school. One time during the last train ride home, I had to take 2 trains and 2 buses each way. We were coming into the final station where I'd get off. There was this Asian guy acting a bit strange during the ride. As the train braked entering the station, he stood up in the middle of the car, then suddenly fell flat on his face from a full standing position. He just lay there until the train came to a complete stop, then got up, dusted himself off, and walked out the open doors like nothing happened. I ended up seeing this guy do the exact same thing 5 more times on different nights. After a while, I started enjoying it, watching new riders' reactions to this bizarre performance. Plenty of other weird things happened on those late-night subway rides, but his routine was my favorite. I really enjoyed the entertainment. Story 16. My father used to live in Kazakhstan around 2006. One day he was at a bar with a work friend when a tall, muscular Russian man walked in. He decided he wanted a specific bar stool near my dad, but instead of picking an empty one, he walked over to a stool occupied by a small woman and literally threw her off it, yelling that he wanted that chair. My dad saw this and immediately intervened, saying, "Hey man, what the hell are you doing?" The Russian man responded by threatening him, saying things like, "I'm going to beat you up when you leave the bar." My father initially brushed it off, but then noticed that more of the man's friends were arriving. 4 large men inside the bar and another 4 waiting outside. At this point, my dad got nervous and called the head of security, HOS, for his company. Keep in mind, my dad was the managing director for Kazakhstan at the time. The HOS told him to stay put and wait. After some tense drinks with his work buddy, about 30 bodyguards started entering the bar, forming a protective line from my dad to the exit. Given the country, they were all armed. They created a wall of people on either side of my father. Then the HOS led him to his car. But that wasn't all. 2 additional black BMWs were there to escort him home. It might not be the most extreme story, but hearing my dad describe it was wild. He said the temptation to flip off the big Russian guys was huge, but he didn't want to risk it. Story 17. I was traveling in Honduras with a girl I was seeing, along with her sister and a few other people. We were staying at a hostel. During the September 15th celebrations in this little town, there were lots of festivities going on, and we went out to enjoy the day. That night, on our way back to the hostel, we started fooling around a bit, making out in the town plaza. Since we couldn't go back to the hostel, our friends were there, and it was really dark outside, we decided to take it further right there. The plaza had some columns and relatively private areas. We started hooking up between a couple of the columns. She was leaning back against one, and we were partially on the ground. After a little while, she started shaking with this weird look on her face. I thought, wow, she's having the most intense orgasm I've ever seen. Then I felt something strange in my legs too. This tingling, overwhelming sensation. At first I thought I was also having some crazy moment, but then I recognized the sensation. Electricity. We were being electrocuted. I pulled us both to the side. I looked back and saw exposed wires coming out of the column she had been leaning on. She started crying and freaking out, saying she couldn't move and thought she was going to die. It was terrifying in the moment, but we were okay. Story 18. About 19 years ago, 3-year-old me, my mom, and dad came home to find our cat Nubs missing. The whole family turned the apartment upside down, but there was no trace of the cat. My mom even made missing flyers, despite the fact that all the doors and windows had been locked. Days turned into weeks, then into months, and eventually she came to terms with the fact that Nubs had disappeared. Cut to last year, out of the blue, my grandma suddenly confesses that she lost Nubs. She said that while we were out shopping, she went to the mall across the street and used my baby stroller to hold extra shopping bags. Unbeknownst to her, Nubs had been sleeping in the mesh pouch under the seat and woke up in the middle of the mall, then jumped out and ran off. My grandma, too nervous and embarrassed to ask for help, just left the store and our cat there. When we came home about 30 minutes later, she even helped us search for him. It makes me both laugh and cry thinking about what happened to my mom's favorite cat. For years, he had just vanished into thin air, and now we finally know why. Story 19. I come from a very sheltered background in a small, mostly apostolic Christian town. I'm not apostolic myself. Around 8th grade, my parents divorced, and my mom moved us to a slightly bigger city where I started meeting people who weren't as PG as I was used to. At my first house party that summer, I met a guy named Punk Rock Rob. As a side note, he had a habit of randomly flashing people, and to this day, dude had the most absurdly large penis I've ever seen. It was cartoonish. A couple of months later, my friend and I tried to sneak into a girl's house to stay the night. Her parents caught us and kicked us out. Now we were out in the city in winter with nowhere to go. We couldn't call our parents because we had told them the classic lie that we were sleeping at each other's houses. That's when we remembered Punk Rock Rob worked at the nearby Jimmy John's. We went to ask him for a ride home, but instead, he invited us to a party in an even bigger city. That sounded exciting for 2 small-town kids. So he drove us into the ghetto to his friend's house, and that's where things got crazy. Turns out, Punk Rock Rob was part of a white supremacist gang. This immediately made me uncomfortable, but we didn't have a ride out. We were stuck. They made us drink more than I've ever drunk before or since. Then in the middle of the hood, they started yell singing a song from American History X, the one sung by the guy in the ice cream truck. I got chased around with a taser that night. Someone stole my shoes. We passed out in some random house. When we woke up, Punk Rock Rob was gone. So there we were, stuck in a stranger's house full of neo-Nazis, no way home, and I was supposed to be taking a picture with Santa in just a few hours with my very Christian family. Fortunately, another friend who could drive came to pick us up. That night changed the way I saw the world forever. Story 20. When my nieces were around 6 and 8 years old, they had a pet rat named Spider-Man. He was very old for a rat and had developed tumors. He would screech in pain on and off through the night. My brother, who I was living with at the time, asked me to take him to the vet to see if anything could be done. I agreed, mostly because I was tired of the constant noise. So my nieces and I took Spider-Man to the vet. In the waiting room, he was squealing nonstop. After about 10 minutes, we were called into the exam room. The vet pulled Spider-Man out of the cage and started poking and prodding him while admitting he had never treated a rat before. He told us there was nothing that could be done and that the most humane thing would be euthanasia. He explained that an effective and inexpensive method was putting the rat in a sealed container with baking soda and vinegar to produce carbon dioxide and make him pass peacefully. As he was explaining this, with Spider-Man still in his hand, the rat bit him hard on the index finger. The vet yelled, "Motherfucker!" and reflexively flung his hand. Spider-Man hit the wall and died instantly. There was a moment of stunned silence before my nieces began sobbing. The vet apologized profusely and gave them several stuffed animals from around the office, plus free merch for their dog and cat at home. We also weren't charged for the visit. I still go to that same vet 15 years later, and he hasn't thrown another animal since. Rest in peace, Spider-Man. Story 21. Pretty sure this will get buried, but anyway, I moved to Amsterdam and had trouble finding affordable housing. I got a job working at a hostel and started looking into alternative living options. I camped for over a month. I noticed a lot of houseboats and became interested. I learned that in the Netherlands, you don't need a license to drive a boat under 12 meters long, so I started boat shopping. I found one in Leeuwarden in the north. A nice couple was selling their 7-meter cabin sailboat. It took me 2.5 hours to get there by train, and then 3 days to bring the boat back. It was my first time sailing a boat. Here's the thing, I didn't actually sail it. I used its small propeller engine to get back to Amsterdam. On the way, the rudder broke. I had to makeshift a new one just to stay on course since I had work the next day. The engine died twice while I was near the sea, and I was stranded near the coast. Near nightfall, I got overconfident and tried to make it to the next marina across the Emir. The sea got rough. I was terrified the rudder would break again or the engine would quit, but in the end, I made it in one piece. I've been living on the same boat for the last couple of months. Story 22. I had a job cleaning hotel rooms once. On my third day, I was still shadowing another employee, and we were on our last room, the King Suite. We walked in, and everything looked fairly normal. A little messy, maybe 10 beer bottles, a squash on the counter, pizza boxes, and so on. As soon as we opened the closet by the door, one of the nastiest smells I've ever encountered hit me full in the face. I looked up and saw a brown sheet balled up. The sheets were supposed to be white. My coworker handled that situation while I took the easier tasks, changing the bed sheets, half expecting something awful, vacuuming, wiping down the counters. When she moved on to mopping the linoleum floor in the kitchen, she said it felt like the guests had spilled something, as there was a weird residue all over it. I was finished with my part and waiting on her. In previous rooms, we had found items we could keep, things like half-empty bottles of liquor or little trinkets, as long as they weren't expensive or something someone would come back for. I saw the squash on the counter and thought it would be cute for my mom to use as fall decor, so I picked it up, no gloves because no one used gloves at this place, and took it to the cart. But it felt greasy, like it was coated in something. I thought maybe it was just rotting, so I sniffed it and immediately recognized the scent. I walked back inside and told her, "This thing has lube on it." And then everything made sense. The brown sheet, the beer bottles, the residue on the floor, and the lubed-up squash. I was scheduled for 2 more weeks, but I walked out of those automatic doors and never went back. And that, kids, is the story of the mythical ass squash. Story 23. This was during the summer between my junior and senior year of college. One time I showed up at a guy's parents' house to pick up a mutual friend. It turned out the guy who sold weed to all of us was also there, and they were all completely stoned. The parents were nowhere to be found, but the entire house reeked of smoke. I had an internship that required drug testing, so even though I wanted to join in, I couldn't. As the only sober person, I tried to convince my friend to leave with me before we got into trouble. Just as we were about to leave, The host's dog started going nuts by the front hall bathroom. The dealer went to check and came back saying there was a possum in the bathroom. We all assumed he was joking, but after checking one by one, sure enough, there was a real possum in there. The dealer had the bright idea to use a broom to sweep the possum into a dog kennel. It actually worked. Then came the big question, now what? The obvious answer? They hotboxed a wild possum in the front hallway. I managed to get my friend out shortly after. Less than 15 minutes later, the parents came home to a stoned, caged possum surrounded by a bunch of high 18 to 20-year-olds, including their son. They never believed the possum got in through the doggy door. My friend and I got away clean. Story 24. Late one night, my friends and I decided to buy some weed. These were my nerdier friends. We met through video games and played a lot of D&D that summer, so this was definitely out of the ordinary. It was before weed was legalized in my state. We were in high school, bored, and looking for something to do. The three of us got in a car and managed to reach my friend's weed guy, someone he had met maybe twice, who told us to meet him at a Taco Bell in a neighboring town. So we went. The place was pretty empty. It was around 10 p.m. in the suburbs. We grabbed some Taco Bell freezes and waited. The guy showed up, and we headed to his car for the exchange. Easy. He went inside to eat, and we drove off. We were feeling excited because this was all new to us. As we pulled out of the parking lot, my friend merged into the left turn lane at the last second, forgetting that we were supposed to turn. So now the car was sitting at a 45-degree angle, half in the lane and half out. Since it was empty, he decided to just make the left turn, even though the light was red. Lights. Sirens. My other friend started swearing at the driver, and I just sat there thinking, there's no way this is happening. We hadn't smoked anything yet, but even in the bag, the weed smell was strong. My life flashed before my eyes. The driver handed the weed to the passenger, who quickly wrapped it in a rag and threw it in the glove compartment. I sat frozen in the back seat. The cop walked up and asked the driver if he knew why we were pulled over. He said yes and explained he thought it was safer than sitting at an angle in the road. Then out of nowhere, she looked at us and said, "Your eyes are looking awful red." We all internally freaked out. We weren't high, but it definitely looked bad. She leaned into the car and flashed her light into our faces. "Have you boys been smoking?" No, we all said. My friend even offered to take a drug test. She stared at us for a while, then walked back to her car. We had no idea what would happen. When she returned, she asked what we were doing in that town, since the car was registered elsewhere. We explained we were visiting friends and grabbing Taco Bell. That seemed to satisfy her. Then she asked for the driver's license and registration. He leaned over to the glove box, the same glove box that now contained a big rag-covered bag of weed. My heart stopped. He started fishing through the compartment, carefully moving papers around the bag. The cop's flashlight was still shining through the window. I kept expecting her to ask what was in the rag or why he wasn't taking it out. I knew that if he removed that bag, the smell would fill the car. But he stayed calm, kept pretending to search, pulling out the wrong papers, saying, "It's in here somewhere." Finally, he found the right one. She checked his info, warned us not to do that maneuver again, and let us go. We nervously laughed the entire way home. The friend in the passenger seat decided he never wanted to go through anything like that again and got a weed card shortly afterward. So yeah, I almost got arrested for drug possession the first time I ever bought weed with my best nerdy friends, and that was a wild Thursday night. Story 25. This is the story of the oatmeal man. My high school baseball team was on a school bus traveling from Louisville to Indianapolis for a tournament when a guy in a car pulled up next to us on the freeway, waving and trying to get our attention. We assumed he was a parent or something, so we waved back. He made sure my seatmate and I were watching, then clipped his shirt collar to the steering wheel with some kind of homemade rig, leaving a big opening in his shirt. He then grabbed two 2-gallon buckets of what I can only hope was cooked oatmeal and began pouring all of it into the opening in his shirt. Everyone on the bus, including our coaches, started screaming in complete confusion as this guy swerved down the freeway, even driving into the emergency lane to stay next to us. Then he reached into his shirt, pulled out a handful of the oatmeal, smeared it all over his face, laughed hysterically, and waved at us. To finish it off, he unhooked his shirt so it snapped back against his neck, flinging oatmeal all over his windshield and driver's side window. He casually waved goodbye, exited the freeway, and we never saw him again. To this day, it's still my favorite thing that's ever happened. Story 26. It was around 1996 to 1997. I was 14 or 15 years old, living in a small town in Minnesota. My friends and I had already been smoking weed for a few years. One day, a close friend told us he knew of a field of weed growing on a nearby farm. At the time, we were really into Cheech and Chong movies, so the idea of finding an actual weed field was just too tempting to pass up. We weren't planning on stealing it all, just wanted to see it and maybe grab a few buds. So that weekend, 3 of us went. Me, the friend who told us about it, and my girlfriend's younger brother. We parked down the road and walked toward the barn. The house was set about 30 to 40 feet off the road, with a driveway running to a barn about half a mile back, bordered by a cornfield. As we got closer to the barn, just past the corn, we found a pile of chopped up weed plants, just stalks and fan leaves, no buds. It looked like someone had just mowed them down. We figured they might be drying the good stuff in the barn. It was a 2-story barn. The first floor had just a tractor and some old equipment. We were spread out looking around. I went upstairs, and when I looked out a window, I saw a pickup truck speeding down the driveway toward the barn. I yelled, "Run!" There wasn't time to go back down the stairs, so I ran and jumped out of the 2nd-story opening on the side of the barn. I remember being in the air for way longer than I expected. I hit the ground and rolled, stinging pain in my legs, but I got up and ran into the cornfield. I heard the other 2 guys hit the ground behind me. We got split up in the corn. The truck tried to chase us into the rows, made a few passes, circled, and eventually left. We regrouped and walked back to the car, only to find the police waiting. I had left a grow guide on the car floor, and the cop had seen it while waiting. They questioned us, and we said something about looking for bike trails. We got off with a trespassing warning. I'll never forget the feeling of flying out of that barn. I still don't know how high the drop was. I'm 37 now and still good friends with one of the guys from that day. Story 27. Back in high school, my closest friend was often drawn to people much older than us. One of them, let's call him Jeff, was in his early 20s and shared a place with a roommate. He said we could celebrate our milestone birthday party at his house. Thinking back, the whole setup was clearly not ideal. On the day of the party, Jeff stopped responding to her messages, but she insisted we go ahead anyway. So we arrived with several carloads of classmates. As we pulled up, the porch was already crowded with older strangers, casually drinking and observing us as we approached. An argument broke out between my friend and Jeff while his group just stood there on the porch. Then someone way in the back yelled at my friend, calling her a fat cunt and telling her to shut up. He was clearly drunk. I wasn't about to let that slide. I saw my opportunity and shouted, "How about you shut your mouth before I knock you off your crutches?" I expected some laughs. Instead, the older women on the porch came storming toward me, yelling that I went too far. That's when I saw him clearly. This man wasn't just on crutches for a sprained ankle. He was missing his leg from the knee down. I hadn't noticed before because he was standing in the back. Apparently, a few months earlier, he got drunk, passed out on train tracks, and lost part of his leg. Everyone else knew the story, except me. All 15 of us turned and bolted back to the cars, laughing the entire way. Story 28. I was a young lad of 18, deployed to Afghanistan back in 2004 as a cavalry scout in the Army. We ran a 4 Humvee platoon and had set up a hidden vehicle checkpoint at night in a dry riverbed north of Kandahar. We were told that locals didn't usually go out after dark, so if you saw anything moving at night, it was probably suspicious. Everything was quiet until we were about to pack up, and we spotted 2 sets of headlights approaching. They drove right into our concealed location, and we caught them completely off guard. We pulled them out of their vehicles and started asking questions. Their trucks were packed full of chickens, huge wire cages loaded all the way to the top. The drivers were terrified, thinking we were going to treat them like the Russians did and execute them. Can't blame them for being nervous. They told us that a nearby mountain pass checkpoint, supposedly run by police, was actually being used to rob travelers. We had passed through that same checkpoint earlier that day and saw only 2 relaxed-looking men with AK-47s who claimed to be police. They had paperwork and said they were just checking IDs. My lieutenant came up with a plan. We'd follow the chicken trucks up the pass with no headlights, using night vision to see what really went down. So we rolled up behind the chicken trucks, about 100 feet back, and watched as they approached the checkpoint. This time, there were at least 10 men instead of 2, and they were not relaxed. One of them shoved an AK barrel into the truck driver's window. That was all we needed to see. We flipped on our lights and came flying up the pass. The guard at the window immediately pretended he was just waving the truck through. We stormed the checkpoint and began rounding them up. Then my lieutenant told me and my buddy KB to check out a strange rock formation uphill. As we approached, we could tell it was hollowed out. Inside were about a dozen men laying on mats, who started to get up. We shouted and aimed our rifles, hoping to scare them into surrendering, and it worked. We searched the cave and found a ridiculous stash of weapons. AKs, machine guns, RPGs, grenades, even TNT, plus stacks of currency from Afghanistan, Iran, and Iraq, as well as watches, jackets, shoes, you name it. These guys had been robbing people blind. But when we called Squadron to ask what to do, they told us we couldn't detain them. So, reluctantly, we let them go. They sulked down the road and disappeared. We weren't sure what to do with all the stolen goods until the chicken truck drivers reappeared. My lieutenant started throwing armfuls of cash and supplies into their trucks. The drivers were crying and laughing, overwhelmed with joy. They couldn't believe it. That night changed how we approached every checkpoint afterward. We ended up crashing quite a few. It was one of 100 crazy stories from that year. And sometimes I still wonder if it even really happened. Story 29. About 3 years ago, I had a run-in with someone who tried to hijack my vehicle. Every Thursday night, I usually hang out with my friends. We play Magic, The Gathering, and watch videos, and I normally get home around 2 or 3 a.m. I live near the University of Notre Dame in northern Indiana. There's some crime in the nearby metro area, but around campus, it's generally not a big concern. This happened in July. I pulled up to a stoplight and noticed out of the corner of my eye that the old dark Ford Explorer next to me was rocking back and forth like someone was headbanging to music. I didn't think much of it. We were the only 2 cars on the road. When the light turned green, the Explorer floored it, got in front of me, and then slammed on the brakes. We both came to a full stop, and for about 15 seconds, nothing happened. I didn't know what this guy wanted. I tried to go around him, but he whipped around, did a U-turn, and faced me head-on. That's when I knew this wasn't just weird, it was dangerous. I sped past him, but he caught up quickly and pulled alongside me. I got a good look at him. Gold teeth, beady eyes, sneering face, and something in his hand that I'm fairly sure was a gun, though I couldn't confirm it. He got in front of me again and slammed the brakes. I veered onto a side road through a residential area. At this point, I was fumbling with my phone to call 911. The operator picked up, but it felt like it took forever. Meanwhile, I saw the Explorer's headlights swerving wildly behind me, like something from a horror movie. I was yelling into my phone that I was being chased and gave my location. I blocked the road with my Jeep so he couldn't pass unless he hit me. We approached a sharp turn near my apartment complex, both of us going about 45 miles per hour. Way too fast. As I turned, I saw his headlights go off the road and into a ditch. I didn't stop. I kept driving into a nearby apartment complex, found a spot at the back, and stayed on the phone with 911. About 15 minutes later, I saw flashing lights and pulled up to a group of officers. I explained everything. Turns out the guy blew out a tire during that turn and ditched the Explorer right outside my complex. I never heard whether they caught him. I don't know who he was or why he targeted me. I hadn't cut anyone off or made anyone mad. For the next month, I parked 2 lots away from my usual spot. I don't really believe in God, but if there is one, I owe him at least 10 Hail Marys for saving me that night. Story 30. I dropped out of school to join this crappy band once with a drummer who had just gone through a breakup. At first, everything was typical band stuff. The drummer, S, was doing okay emotionally until one night when our band manager came over. S started venting to him, saying how devastated she was and, in the heat of the moment, said she wished her ex-girlfriend were dead. After the outburst, she calmed down and felt better, and our manager said, "I'll take care of this," then left. We thought nothing of it and went back to writing music. A week or 2 later, S gets a frantic call from her ex. She's being rushed to the hospital with severe stomach pain, and it looks life-threatening. Later that night, our manager shows up and casually reveals that he took care of it. We were stunned. Turns out he meant it literally. He worked in a lab and had access to a variety of chemicals. He had filled a capsule with a substance meant to create a violent reaction in the stomach, one he believed would cause it to burst and kill her. He invited her over, gave her the capsule under the guise of Tylenol when she mentioned a headache. She took it despite its unfamiliar appearance. Luckily, he miscalculated the dose. She spent a few painful days in the hospital but survived. We immediately fired him and cut off all contact. That's the most metal and horrifying thing that ever happened in my life. Story 31. One time when I was around 18, I was out on my balcony smoking some weed around midnight. I lived in a quiet neighborhood and decided to take a walk. I grabbed my backpack and camera. At an intersection, a loud-lowered Chevy Silverado pulled up beside me, revving its engine. I instinctively started snapping photos. The guy in the passenger seat motioned me over, and just as I reached the road, the light turned green and he shouted, "Jump in the truck!" I climbed into the bed and found 3 others already lying down. I lay sideways against the tailgate, slightly terrified as the truck sped off like a rocket. One of the guys in the back grabbed my hand, probably sensing I was uneasy. It was way too loud to talk or hear anything, and I didn't dare raise my head, just watch streetlights fly overhead at breakneck speed. Eventually, we stopped in front of a nightclub. Everyone in the truck was pumped to see me. A guy with an Eastern European accent approached and said, "You're the guy who jumped in the truck. You're crazy, man." They all had accents I couldn't quite place. Turns out they were from Newfoundland, but now living in Louisiana. I didn't have my wallet or ID, but one guy handed me an ID from a 40-year-old balding man who vaguely looked like me. Somehow it worked and I got in. They bought me drinks and we had a great night. Afterward, we ended up at a house party with wine, an older woman who was their co-worker, and a very drunk Russian guy. When I was ready to leave, I asked them to drop me near where they picked me up. I hopped back in the truck, lay in the bed again, and watched the street signs go by. The truck did a perfect donut, drifted around a corner, and pulled into my apartment complex gate. They lived just a couple buildings over the whole time. I never saw them again. Story 32. While working as a receptionist at a 4-star hotel, we regularly hosted events with overnight guests. Everything seemed normal. Seminars, guests moving around the hotel, and families visiting. During the day, a woman came in with a few young kids asking for a man staying at the hotel. I checked, called the room, and the man came down to greet his wife and kids. They hugged and kissed, totally normal. Later that night, after the event, most guests went to bed, except for one couple making out heavily on a couch in the empty bar. Then the woman started audibly moaning. The guy was fingering her. I could see it both live and on the cameras. Instead of taking it to a room they had paid for, they kept going right there. After some time, they finally got up and took the elevator. Thank God, I thought. But instead of going to their room, they went to the basement, where there's a blind spot. A while later, they took the elevator to the top floor, even though neither had a room there. I had to check the basement for safety. Down there, I found a table with 2 very obvious, sweaty ass cheek marks. As I got back to reception, I called the elevator to my floor, just in case someone came by. The doors opened, and the same couple stood there, awkwardly pretending nothing happened. Judging from the marks and timing, I realized they had also had S in the elevator. But it didn't stop there. They went outside and started having S right on the sidewalk near the road at 4 or 5 a.m. That's when I lost it. I made a fake Facebook profile, looked up the guy, found a family photo, identified the wife, and messaged her with everything I'd seen. I even got the cheating woman's profile from the photo tags. I told my trusted manager and coworker. When I came in next shift, the guy had shown up furious. My good manager backed me up, but the other manager, who hadn't known anything, scolded me and even asked if I was trying to destroy a family. I told him, people like that don't deserve a family.